Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to give it a couple minutes while people filter in. I'm Malik Dasu from the African Climate Foundation. I'm a program officer on our sustainable land use and agriculture portfolio. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, and I will introduce our speakers in a minute. Okay, I see the number of attendees starting to plateau, so I think let's start it here. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to join us in today's webinar. Today is the kickoff of a series of 3 webinars in partnership with the Center of Competition Regulation and Economic Development, the African Climate Foundation, and the Center of Excellence in Food Security. This webinar is the first since the launch of the African Food System Transformation Collective, which is a collective of African food system experts and advocacy groups from around the continent, and is attempting to redirect donor financing towards transforming African food systems. This series is intended to unpack the dynamics of African food markets and competition reforms. Today's session, though, is focusing on the barriers to entry and growth of smaller market participants in food and agriculture markets. Barriers to entry, as many of you know, create and reinforce the market power of larger firms, which tends to lead to higher prices, lower levels of innovation, and a less competitive economy overall. African food markets are already beset by many fragilities, from poor trade infrastructure to tenuous market conditions, especially for smaller market actors. Economic and environmental shocks result in devastating impacts on the prices received by smallholder producers and paid by consumers. As an example, following the drought last year in East Africa, we saw maize prices rise between 30 and 40%, higher than they should have been. Facilitating smaller market actors to participate more efficiently in agri-food markets, we're attempting to create a climate adaptive response in our food systems. Today's speakers come from a range of different expertise areas. Our first speaker is Grace Nsomba from the Center of Competition Regulation and Economic Development. We'll be speaking about the current state of food markets in East and Southern Africa, looking at the opportunities for inclusion through small and medium scale producers. Our second speaker, Johanne Kalinde from Community Agribusiness Partners Malawi, smallholder cooperatives. He'll be speaking to examples of opportunities and experiences of producers in food markets in Malawi. Our final speaker is Coco Kujo from the Graça Machel Trust, who will be speaking about the role of different stakeholders in breaking down some of these barriers to entry. We trust it'll be a rich conversation, and we encourage everyone in the audience to type your questions into the chat box or Q&A box. I think with that, let me pass on to our first speaker, Grace. At the end of the 3 speakers' discussions, I'll turn it over to some of the audience questions and ask some of my own that have been popping up throughout the presentations. So with that, Grace, I will hand over to you and we can see your presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Malik. And good afternoon to everybody that has joined us. As Malik has mentioned, my name is Grace Nsomba, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Competition, Regulation, and Economic Development. I'll be going through this brief presentation around barriers to the entry and growth of smaller market participants in food and agriculture markets, focusing on East and Southern Africa. The presentation itself draws from some of the ongoing research at the center under the African Market Observatory Initiative, which is an initiative that focuses on tracking the workings of food markets in East and Southern Africa. So this is including looking at prices at various levels of food value chains, but also analyzing and tracking inclusion, participation, as well as the changes in structures of markets in the region. So as a starting point, I would just like to highlight a few facts based on the research that we've done. And then this will also provide some good background for the subsequent slides, but also for the discussion to follow. So Africa is in a food crisis, and I think this is something that has been canvassed quite substantially by various bodies of research. From the perspective of markets in East and Southern Africa, we're finding that markets are not working well, and this is subsequently leading to rapidly worsening food security for the region. Some of the issues underlining or underpinning these outcomes is that there's high levels of concentration in food markets. So for instance, you'll typically find between 2 to 4 vertically integrated main players or suppliers in food value chains in the region. And then you also have this is in the context of high barriers to entry, where small and medium scale producers have to contend with barriers that limit their participation in an effective manner. This is then also in the context that there is generally limited market information, which hampers the way in which small and medium scale producers can make decisions, but also bargain within these markets. All these issues are then exacerbated by the effects of climate change. And as Malik had alluded to as well, we've seen in East Africa the drought that has taken place over the past 2 years, but also El Nino then also coming into effect now for Southern Africa. And this has massive impacts for the way in which small and medium scale market participants can participate, but also the way in which markets can work. On the other hand, however, there's huge growth potential on the continent in terms of agriculture. For example, 60% of the world's remaining arable land is based or is located on the continent. If we take Zambia, for example, Zambia is estimated to have approximately 40 million hectares of land, but currently only 10% of this is being cultivated. If we take Southern Africa or Southern Sub-Saharan Africa as an example in this context, we also know that small and medium scale producers are the engine of food production. These are the majority of producers that produce food, but also participate along the value chain. Many of these also happen to be women, where the FAO finds that at least 50% of agri-food system workers in Sub-Saharan Africa are women. So against this, Africa does have the potential to address the challenges that it faces. However, what we find is that there's need to support farmers and small and medium scale producers, as well as regional initiatives to making markets work. So against this backdrop, I'll go into specific food markets, highlighting some key opportunities for small and medium scale producers, but also looking at some of the challenges that are currently being faced. So if we look at fertilizer as a starting point, which is also one of the main inputs when you look at agricultural production on the continent, fertilizer has been one of the big areas of focus in terms of donor support, and also extensively in partnership with private business. But as a first finding, we find that information on fertilizer markets and also on fertilizer prices is extensively patchy across East and Southern Africa. So while there's prices at the world level and in most cases for South Africa, other countries across the region have very patchy prices. On top of this, we also find that there's extensive variation in prices from the world market right down to East and Southern African markets over space and over time. So if we take January 2021 as an example, prices on the world market were just over $200 per ton. Going into the second half of the year, which we see with the black line here, world prices shot up quite substantially based on issues to do with world supply, linked to the availability of gas and other inputs into fertilizer. This then obviously had a knock-on effect on markets within East and Southern Africa, where we see subsequent price rises in South Africa as the green line, but also in Kenya as the red, and Malawi and Zambia after that as blue and orange, respectively. However, towards the end of 2022, we see that world prices substantially dropped, and now in the middle of 2023 have essentially reached the same level as they were in January of 2021. we don't see the same trend being mimicked in East and Southern Africa. And this is where we started to wonder what the problem is. So for example, in Kenya, prices remain around $400 to $500 per ton above world prices. And then in Malawi and Zambia, around $600 to $800 per ton above world prices. In trying to analyze the reasons behind this, we consider what the reasonable costs to import fertilizer into the market, into the region are, including costs for shipping, port charges, as well as bagging and transport. And we approximate this to be around $250 per ton to land fertilizer into the region. However, even adding $250 per ton on top of the world price, we find that there's still an excess of $300 to $400 per ton being charged in the region, either to governments or to farmers. The consequences of this are that there's huge losses in terms of agricultural production foregone, where farmers either move away from planting products that require high fertilizer intake, or where there's just smaller numbers of farmers that are reached through subsidy programs. In total, we average it to be around $180 million per year in cost as an extra cost to countries importing fertilizer. This in itself has significant consequences for the levels of production across the region, for example, in terms of maize. We also then consider maize markets and look at the prices of maize in producing areas, such as in Zambia and Malawi, shown by this orange line here, against consuming areas such as Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, shown by the red line here. We project or we map out these prices from January 2021 to mid-2023 against reasonable transport costs, which are around 4 cents to 6 cents per ton per kilometer. We find that Zambia is, for one, amongst the countries with the lowest maize prices in the world. So as a starting point, against the fertilizer input costs that Zambian farmers face, there's extensively low returns for farming maize in the first place. We also find that transport costs do not justify the prices that are being charged in consuming cities such as Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. And therefore, there are substantial profit margins that are being earned. And these are being realized that by those few firms that are able to export maize to Kenya from around mid-2022. Excess margins we estimate to be around $1 billion per year of household spending in Tanzania and Kenyan cities. So these cities are actually spending that much more money in order to consume maize as their staple product. We then also looked at soybean markets and soybean trade. But now we looked at soybean as a key input into the animal feed and poultry value chain, where farmers are the ones that plant and farm soybean at the upstream level. And these are then traded down into traders, which are then used for the production of animal feed, as well as for the production of broilers and breeding stock as well. So we consider prices and trade and market dynamics at these various levels of the value chain in order to understand participation, inclusion, and market outcomes. As a starting point, we again map out the prices of soybean in producing areas such as Zambia and Malawi against consuming areas such as Nairobi, which extensively imports soybean as an input into animal feed for poultry production. We again find that Zambian prices are extensively low, in some cases even below world prices, where there's also extensive imports or exports rather into the region. However, when we look at prices in consuming areas such as in Nairobi, prices are substantially higher and are not justified by transport costs, which are again around 4 to 6 US cents per ton per kilometer. Therefore, the effects of this are two-pronged. Firstly, that traders between Zambia and Kenya are in fact earning around, again, $200 to $300 per ton extra than they should be earning. And secondly, the effect of high prices of soybeans is effectively undermining feed and poultry production in industries such as and markets such as in Kenya and Tanzania. We follow on from this by then subsequently assessing what the outcomes are in terms of the pricing of feed and then the pricing of day-old chicks as the other input. Now we peg prices in these countries against those in Brazil and South Africa, and we use Brazil and South Africa as competitive or comparative benchmarks, given that their poultry industries are relatively developed. We consider first the pricing of feed. And I'd like to take you back to what I've just explained around the pricing of soybean. So we find that the farmers in the producing areas of Malawi and Zambia are earning low prices for producing soybeans. However, when we considered the pricing of feed, we found that feed prices are substantially higher in all three countries relative to the comparative benchmarks of Brazil and South Africa, which are the purple and green lines on this graph. This is despite, in some cases, in the first 2 quarters of 2021, where Zambia and Malawi had actually competitively priced feed, where feed prices were pretty much in line with prices in Brazil and in South Africa. However, prices shot up in Zambia much quicker than in Malawi, but both in terms of the same magnitude, to reach prices in Kenya, where we find that large producers in Kenya are able to source from related companies, set prices, and maintain their margins, whereas smaller producers are the ones that are receiving these arm's length prices that are extensively higher, which render them uncompetitive. In Kenya, total feed volumes reduced by 20 to 30% because of these high prices of soybean, and yet small feed and poultry producers also went out of business. Despite this, the main feed producers that are vertically integrated into poultry production managed to maintain their margins and their profits. In Zambia, the effects were that prices went up by around 90% in the 3rd quarter of 2021. This obviously then rendered independent Zambian poultry producers to be at a disadvantage relative to vertically integrated poultry producers that are able to, again, source feed at a cheaper cost. In Malawi, we also see similar effects where we've identified effectively margin squeezes by the main integrated monopoly firm, which had adverse effects on smaller downstream poultry producers in the 4th quarter of 2021. Now, this is just one aspect of the input costs for poultry producers in all 3 countries. When you consider day-old chicks as the other input cost, you find that poultry producers that are small and independent are again at a disadvantage relative to very well producing countries such as South Africa and Brazil. For example, prices across Zambia, Malawi, and Kenya, as we see on the graph at the bottom, all shot up by mid-2021, reaching levels that are around close to $1 per chick, whereas producers in Brazil are paying around 30 cents per chick. This in itself renders producers in these East and Southern African countries highly uncompetitive, particularly relative to producers that are vertically integrated into the inputs for poultry production. So what we're finding essentially, and this is one of the areas with which perhaps our speakers can also come in, is that the high levels of market concentration, the vertical integration of the main producers, as well as the barriers to entry, continue to render small and medium scale producers highly uncompetitive at multiple levels of the poultry value chain. These are some of the outcomes that we've seen, and I think it would be useful for us to also carry on the discussion following this, Malik. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Grace. It's always so interesting to listen to Cred's insights and findings on prices and the different margin squeezes that a lot of our smallholder producers face. Before I get into questions to you, let me then turn over to our second speaker, who is Johanna Kalinde from the Community Agribusiness Partners of Malawi Smallholder Cooperatives, speaking to the examples of opportunities and experiences of producers in food markets in Malawi. Johanne, are you able to speak?
Yes, I am able to speak. Thank you. Now, thank you for the very comprehensive presentation there, Grace. We have been, first of all, my name is Johanne Kalinde. I work for Community Agribusiness Partners, which was formerly known as the Clinton Foundation's development initiative in Malawi. Good afternoon to everyone. Our experience while working with smallholder farmers with these markets has been evolving through the course of our engagement in Malawi. We started off with putting farmers into groups, small groups that would actually produce and increase yields. We further discovered that, we further noted that increasing yields alone was really taking us nowhere, because the market, the structured market, the market did not actually recognize any grade of product of commodity that was being put out. For example, soybeans in Malawi. For example, soybeans in Malawi do not have a grade. You just sell soybeans the way you actually have produced them. So there is quite a bit of what do you call this? A lot of work that needs to go into a final grade of soybean, a final product of soybean that can be recognized on the market that, okay, this is a good grade. So we started working on the post-harvest quality, which also did not actually change much. What changed a lot with this experience was putting the farmers into bigger groups and registering them as cooperatives. Now they have a registration and an identity that can actually be what do you call this? That can actually get into contractual agreements, an identity that can actually now get partners sign open bank accounts and things like that. Once that was done, I think that was about 2018 and 2019, we got into a partnership with Standard Bank Malawi, which was very keen on actually working with farmer groups that were already in an organized format with a business license, the Cooperative Society registration certificate. That opened up a lot more doors in that now the farmer groups were able to aggregate their soybeans. After it was a high yield, after it was nicely graded, it was now being able to aggregate the soybeans in one place and then approach off-takers. We went through the same off-takers that we were engaged in before that do not recognize the quality, that would rather actually offer a small price, even though there has been a lot more work put into that commodity. But gradually we did find off-takers that now started recognizing the quality that was being produced, the work that was going into this. The aggregation helped to get larger volumes from a big number of smallholder farmers into one place for an off-taker to actually pick up. Coming to 2020 to about 2022, we've seen profits go up now in the smallholder farmers' pockets, in that whatever they produce, we can aggregate, store, and sell when the prices are actually much higher. For example, 2020 and 2021, or most of the soybeans that were produced at about 3,000 to 4,000 tons was picked up by African Improved Foods in Rwanda. They recognized the quality. They knew that these are the soybeans that we need to actually produce a good product when it comes to producing food for malnutrition children, and also fortified food for pregnant women. And I believe the biggest client is WFP. 2022 was a different matter altogether, in that we had a lot of soybeans stored We had a lot of soybeans waiting for a buyer. African improved foods were priced out due to our farm gate price, but we, however, just decided to, the board of the farmer cooperatives decided to wait it out. We sold those soybeans later in the year, I would say August, late August, for a profit of about 200 kwacha per kg, which is also going straight into the farmers' pockets. So from our experience, organizing the farmers, getting them to actually work together in that no one farmer can actually talk to a partner and get a loan. No one farmer can actually get to talk to politicians and see if we can actually move some policy issues around. The collective voice was actually much stronger in getting partners to recognize the work that the smallholder farmers are doing, getting a reduction in interest rates with banks, getting a reduction in transport costs, because we now have aggregated commodity sitting in one that also reduces the cost of the off-taker. I think I could stop there and see if there are any questions from what I've gone through.
Thank you so much, Johanna. That was fascinating to hear about the changes that farmers experience moving from much more singular entry points to collectives and the power that that brings to them as a whole. Thank you so much. I think we'll wait. We'll hold for questions until Coco is finished speaking. But yeah, Coco, are you able to present? You're still on mute.
Yes, sorry. Yes, and thank you. Yes, I will. Yeah, I think it's actually quite.
Oh, Coco, you've muted yourself again. Sorry.
Sorry. I said sorry. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Coco Kujo, and I lead the entrepreneurship program at the Graça Machel Trust. I thought it was a good segue for hearing what Johanna just said about collective voice and how that is able to bring about some of the transformation we're looking at. Because Graça Machel Trust, really, our work started and is with around reducing barriers through collective voice and organizing women in different value chains. So we have women in business, but within that, there's all these different sectors, including agribusiness, a very big one that we focus on. I think our work with women entrepreneurs. So we have a program called Women Creating Wealth, because we realize that as we work with women in these different sectors to bring about collective voice, they also had problems, barriers that, we thought there could be a demand side to it, what we could do about it. And then there's also the supply side, where we continue to create the evidence from the practice into policy, into research that then helps us go into how to address some of the issues through advocacy and policy and that. So that's really what got us into this. So in terms of this, the barriers that women entrepreneurs face, I mean, I think there's several. It's around issues of market access is a big one. Finance, access to finance is another one. Property rights, and just gender bias generally. So when we work with women, I think that is the sensitization. But I think also to solve the problem, we're seeing it as there's a role for them to play. So in terms of stakeholders that can bring about some of this change, I think the women themselves as a collective group are really, their voice is important. So even being in a platform like this is about representing the voice of women. And I think we also are very keen on nothing about us without us. So we should also get women as the practitioners in the room. I see one of the entrepreneurs we work with in the room here, Piwo Gutle. I think next time you will be on the platform here to represent the voice of the women that we serve. But it's just nice to see that you're here. But really, is to get women's voice in the room, because I think we can talk about small business, but then we have to go into you know, the gender issue as well, because that matters. If we see the fact that 50% of women are really in the agricultural value chains, but they're really often as, you know, they're known as workers. They don't own the production. They don't own a big part of where the money actually goes to. And we know that money in the hands of women go a long way to really uplifting communities and families. So we at the Graça Machel Trust really have big interest in working with women entrepreneurs to shift their businesses from income-generating enterprises into wealth-creating enterprise, because we know that when they're able to do that, they're able to have more money to advance communities and families, and ultimately our continent. Job creation, all that can happen. And I think that is what makes it really interesting for us. Partnering with institutions, research institutions, really gives us a lot of information. I mean, we've talked about the market access. It's all about information. A lot of it is really around information, because I'll give you an example. We have an entrepreneur who joined us, Esther. She's in Tanzania. She joined us. She was doing a turnover of 30,000. And I think in our program in 2016, by 2021, she had gone to a turnover of $1.5 million dollars. And the big game changer for her was really around access to information, because being in the poultry sector, if she didn't get the information that allowed her to know how the whole value chain works, where opportunities are, for instance, she now produces a feed that she used to buy and which made everything expensive. But because now she's able to produce her own feed, she has an advantage. And now she's also become a feed seller to neighboring poultry farmers around her. But where did she get the information? It was on platforms such as this and other places where she was able to find that she can get this from South Africa. She's in Tanzania. We have women entrepreneurs in the poultry who work in the poultry space. They are still struggling to get feed, competitive feed, prices for their feed and that. And so even that exchange of somebody in Tanzania saying, well, this is what this is where I got that information from, and this is who you can get to, and how they can organize to solve. In terms of the stakeholders, I think access to information within the platforms, doing even the engagement in this platform, with what Grace has presented from CRED, and what we continue to do with organizations like CRED to get information that allows women to be better informed about how they can increase a bit more market share is really important. Of course, then we also, whatever we're learning, we're also taking into stakeholders, government, policymakers around the issues the barrier issues that they really need intervention on. But I think often when we talk about a lot of the small business spaces, we talk about it, but I think everybody's talking about data and research and evidence. So, having evidence is a powerful tool to be able to address issues of anti-competitive practices, address issues of policy change. So for us, this kind of engagement within this kind of platform is really important to be able to get the right information to support the work that we do to advance women interest in agribusiness. And of course, really be part of solving the food security crisis as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Coco. That's a really inspiring story to hear how something as seemingly so simple as access to information, especially among women entrepreneurs, can lead to so many co-benefits. I think it's a really nice message to send. So that brings us to the end of our presentations. I'm now going to open it up to more of the Q&A section. There's already one question in the chat box. It's from Egonu in Uganda, whose question is, how can governments work together with the private sector to improve on sustainable food production on the continent? I think maybe Coco, if I can pass that question on to you, and then I'll see if Johanna and Grace have any additions.
Sorry, can you just say that again? I missed the question. I was trying to read it and you were saying it, but I can't find it on the chat.
No problem. The question is, how can governments work together with the private sector to improve on sustainable food production on the continent? So maybe if you can speak to any examples you've seen of any public-private partnerships that have improved, for example, access to that information that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think so. You know, a big area that we work in is access to funding, right? And we, for instance, have partnered with a parastatal in South Africa, say the Industrial Development Corporation, because we were able to take the issue to them to say, we're doing all we can to really build women's capacity to grow businesses. Now, if you're a development fund, a funding institution, I think it's really, the imperative is on you to see that those women whose capacity we're building get the funding that they need. And whatever additional requirement that we need to do, we are willing to join hands, because we don't, I mean, that's where the partnerships come in. Everybody has a role to play. And so for us, preparing the entrepreneurs to be able to get funding is really a very important intervention. So if we can look at, say, an industrial development corporation as that, you know, it's a quasi private, it's a parastatal, so it does have that role that it has to play. And I think we are responding. Obviously, they have a government mandate to make sure that they meet the quota of funding women in agriculture, etc. So I think invariably, I mean, we're an NGO, but we are facilitating the linkages for the private entrepreneurs who we can say are from the private sector, right? And you know, we're kind of door openers, and I think it's really important about this. A lot of the small businesses will not get a leg in if there isn't a force or a platform that allows them to be seen and heard, right? So I think that the role that we play, and many other players who do this on behalf of the small players, is really, really important, because that is where we're able to get them to be seen and heard. And I think for us, that is starting to really get traction, because when we walk into the room with women who would otherwise not get that opportunity, we do start to see a change and a responsiveness to the issue. But again, it's also about being organized, because, you know, if you're not organized as a collective, it's very difficult for government to want to even engage with you. So that is why our model is around bringing collectives together so that we go as a big voice and not as individuals. I hope that responds to your question.
Thank you so much, Coco. And I think a nice reiteration of the point Johanna was also making. I see there's a question from Nodia Malan. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Nodia, do you want to maybe come in to speak to your question? I see you also have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. I didn't know if I was able to speak, but thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Grace, for the really excellent presentation. You know, we must understand that, you know, below the data that Grace showed, which really suggests some form of collusion or antitrust behavior at the top. And I don't know how we're going to stop that. But if you really look at the food marketing systems, which really operate out of fresh produce markets, and these are governed by food marketing regulations, which are globally almost word for word similar. These systems are at the heart of the exclusion of small producers from the global food trade. And I'm actually quite astounded that we don't see this, because this is a big elephant in the room. These systems, I mean, if you just read the regulations, it's obvious. They aggregate production, it's sold by marketing agents, and those, the prices they will take are, obviously they're striving for higher prices, but the buyers are paying lowest possible prices. Second of all, these systems, the levy that they incur, and we need to really look at these things. I mean, it's these levies which every producer pay, that maintains the system. So R&D and marketing, but also transformation is funded by that, but there's a structural problem. So the big producers are funding the transformation of the small producers, and guess what? The small producers are not getting ahead. no, come on, man, this is obvious. This is not serious. Also, the position of small producers in this system is reinforced by the linear nature of the whole agricultural production system, which once again is highly resource intensive and completely unsustainable. So I think we really need to rethink this. And also, thank you, Grace, for the argument on empty land in Africa is a really nice argument. It sounds great, but the minute we plow that 60% of agricultural fallow land, it'll plunge the climate into a runaway global warming. We simply cannot open new land for agriculture. So I really think we need to be much more critical about the way these things work. It's not going to just help the small farmers. There's a structural problem in the system. Thank you. I said a lot, but I would love to hear what others think.
Thank you, Nadia. Grace, can I pass on to you to answer those questions? A lot to unpack there.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that. I think that is very useful and essentially reinforces some of the issues that I was raising. And one of the very big issues, even outside of the global marketing, is just the general structure of markets. And I think what needs to be re-emphasized is that it starts from a global level and trickles down all the way to, a single country in Malawi, for example, Zambia, where these structural issues come from more developed markets, and through division of markets, such as through mergers, market consolidation, we end up in a situation that markets are extensively consolidated. And these are the markets that small and medium scale farmers and producers have to contend with. So I think it's also going back to a revision of what has happened in the past to get us to this point, and what do we do about it now? So what are the forms of power that this market consolidation has afforded to the main firms? How are they able to exert it? And what are the rules that can be enforced to try and limit this power? And one of the answers, I think, is to even stop looking at it as a country problem, because the global issues need global answers. And I think, Malik, this is what one of the webinars in the next 2 or 3 weeks is going to try and address, is to say there are also institutions at the global level that need to come in when trying to address the issues of small and medium scale producers on the continent. This also means that sort of, decisions that have been taken to, for example, approve mergers. I'm glad Eleanor is on the call. Decisions that have been taken to approve mergers have an effect on producers on the continent, but the continent doesn't really have hasn't had much of a say when those decisions are being made. So it's also about a revision also of antitrust and competition policy to say, what are the levers that the continent actually has in maintaining its own voice? And that in itself needs to be shaped and used effectively. I think Naud and I can have an extensive conversation about this as well, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Grace. Maybe, Grace, there have been a few questions directed directly towards you. So maybe if we can just come to those quickly, and then we'll
Sure.
move on. So one is from Eleanor, which asks, does the data give any indication whether the harms to small stakeholders are a result of efficiencies or pure exploitation / disparate bargaining power? This can affect policy solutions, for example, more collectives or less vertical integration, or finding the cartels.
Sure, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think is very relevant to the issues around the poultry value chain that I raised. So vertical integration is what reinforces the power that is accrued to the main traders and the main producers. And what is important here is that it's not just in a national context, because these producers and traders are linked across the entire East and Southern African region, right? So the harms, first of all, are harms across the region. Secondly, when it comes to efficiencies versus pure exploitation, I would say it's a mixture of both. Inefficiencies in the way that singular markets work, so national markets work, and through single firms being dominant and then being able to essentially trade in the manner with which they trade. That's just something that trickles down from the way the markets are structured and the fact that economies are small and open, so you'll typically really only have a few number of players. But at the same time, what the data has shown us is that these firms across countries are able to behave in a certain way that exploits these markets. So for example, if information sharing on volumes being traded, prices being charged, this information is shared only between a few firms and not between the wider small stakeholders, which means there's already an imbalance of bargaining power between these two groups. And this is reinforced again by the fact that these firms are vertically integrated. So it's a mixture of economies of scale and an exploitation of the structure of markets. So I feel very strongly about the issue of collusion and cartels. And I think that the way the data has moved, if you look at the pricing data together with trade data that we've looked at, there are very strong indications that there's cross-country coordination between firms, likely resulting in very strong cartel conduct. Which I think then links to issues around the competition policy at a regional level, as well as at the level of the AfCFTA, and figuring out the intricacies of how these issues should be addressed at a regional and continental level.
Thank you so much, Grace. It brings me to another question, which I think I'll save for the moment, about how countries can sort of collaborate specifically to address a lot of these sort of climate and market-related factors by facilitating trade relations. But I think let me put that on ice until a little bit later. There's a question here: what is the proposed way forward to deal with the intermediaries in the food market systems that have been established to increasing prices above acceptable limits? So, starting to charge excessive margins. Maybe, Johanne, I can come to you to speak to, the power of these collectives in, improving the sort of bargaining positions of these smallholder producers.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The collective, as I pretty much put in my first presentation, we are talking about small numbers here: 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 tons of soybeans. These are very, very tiny amounts. To get to somewhere where we are actually competing with these big traders, where we're competing with these with the big buyers, we are looking to actually increase at about 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 tons of soybeans. That is an immense amount of undertaking in organizing the primary cooperatives in each region. We're talking about 10 to 20 square kilometer areas. Now combine that into a province or a region in Malawi, central region, northern region. Combine that into a national approach that won't only take the cooperatives doing, it will also need a national focus on that particular path. What the intermediaries will do is actually go out into the farmers' lands. For example, in Malawi, you have a lot of cases where the soybeans are bought while still in the field. January, February comes around, smallholder farmers, unfortunately, have very short-term needs. January, February comes around, people need money to send their kids to school. people need money just to get over Christmas celebrations or whatever, they may have spent the little money they had. We should also remember that we're talking about, in Malawi, we're talking about rain-fed agriculture, so that's one salary a year. So once we actually now, put in interventions along the way, okay, January, February, the cooperative union will try and guarantee the commodity that has been forecasted to come out of the fields. Who needs what money when? The farmers will need the money as soon as the harvest comes out. The quality specifications of the buyer will not actually kick in because you have moisture problems, you have immaturity problems for another month or so. So trying to balance this whole path in that from planting, we support the planting, we support all the, we track the protocols being applied in the farm, on the farm, we try and buy some of that soybean while it's still in the field as per practice without having to actually, without actually having to take all the soybeans away when harvest comes, in that when harvest comes, it's just now a top up of the money that you had already withdrawn, on the money that you already withdrawn earlier in the year. This would actually sort of work, but it needs a lot more funding than we have. It needs a lot more partners than we actually have introduced to the farmers so far. So fighting the intermediaries, it is an advantage for the buyers themselves because actually it will cost you less to actually deal with the farmers directly. You don't have a vendor price in between. The price that the vendor will sell you from after the price that he paid the farmers, all that gap goes back to the farmer if we're actually, as a collective, dealing with the off-taker. The regulatory environment as well. For example, in Malawi, we have a farm gate price that comes out every year. That farm gate price takes into account the cost of production, a bit of profit, and then bam, there it is, 600 kwacha per kg. That's what everyone is going to pay for the soybeans. I have the advantage to live in the city where I can actually make some noise and someone will hear me. Now we're talking about the farmer 100 kilometers away, 200 kilometers away, 300 kilometers away from the city. The infrastructure to get there alone is not actually well set. You are going to use a bad road. You send a truck in the morning, you're expected to come back the next day after collecting goods. So I think without the ecosystem geared to actually help the smallholder farmer, you will still have these intermediaries making money off of the top of those farmers because those farmers do not have access to that buyer directly, and also because they are living in an environment that is not necessarily focused on them doing better. I think I should end it there.
Thank you so much, Johanna, speaking a lot to those sort of much more fundamental structural issues that a lot of us smallholder producers are facing. And a good reminder of us to sort of manage our expectations of, what can be done within the agri-food systems that have been established across the continent. Thank you for that. I think let me pass the last question from the audience onto you, Coco, before I ask for rounding statements, because I see we're coming to the end of our time here. This question comes from Sadito, saying they've heard the issue of women not owning the production. They do not own the money. He's heard it many times. What he's not hearing is how to tackle that problem. Coco, how did this Tanzanian woman overcome the basic problem of non-access to productive resources, in addition to the access to information?
I think that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think it boils down to what we are seeing is we can't underestimate building entrepreneurial skills and zeal, right? Because those issues are there, the structural problems are there, they're not going to go away today. So the best we can do is how to build the resilience and the zeal through skills building, through networking, through associations, through mentorship, coaching, technical assistance. I mean, the work we're doing with say, access to funding. Grassman Shaw Trust has worked on women's financial inclusion for a long time from an advocacy level. It's only until we started getting closer to the problem to say, so what is really happening at the micro level? Did we start to see that women need to be better organized, better formalized? If you're wanting to raise a certain amount of money from the formal system and you're informal, you have not got the track record, you haven't done your part of it's very difficult to make the case. So we're finding that strengthening the foundation of understanding how the business works, so business readiness, market readiness, those preparation, before we even start thinking about funding readiness is really, really important. I mean, the land issue, some of it is very cultural, very, some of that is a little bit more challenging, but in terms of increasing access to funding to be able to grow businesses, we're learning that there's a lot that women entrepreneurs can do better and small business can do better, right? And there's a lot on offer. There is so much on offer in terms of training, capacity building, technical assistance, because I think that is also a big game changer between coaching, mentoring, and technical assistance, because raising funding is a technical business. So if you don't have a technical kind of expertise, looking at it, your business plan, your business model, all those things to make sure that there's good alignment and fit to whoever may be interested to fund you, it's very difficult to get the funding. So it's all related, but I have to say that in the short to medium term, where there are structural barriers, really entrepreneurial resilience and zeal and capacity building is your best avenue, and finding a good community of support to keep you inspired and motivated to keep going, because entrepreneurship is a struggle. It's a struggle for everybody. So, finding your tribe to do this with, we're inviting you to the Women Creating Work program. We'll get you to building the resilience and the linkages that you need actually to feel like you're getting a bit of support to do what you need to do, because women do need more support, much more support to build stronger wealth creating businesses.
Thank you so much, Coco. That's really insightful answer. I think the capacity building and building that entrepreneurial zeal, as you called it, is a good reminder to us about what's really desperately needed. Hi everyone. So we are coming to the end of the webinar now, and I'm so sorry that we won't be able to get to all the comments and questions in the chat. It's been very rich comment box, and I'm hoping our speakers have also read some of what's in there. But maybe just to start rounding off, if I can come to Johanne, Grace, and Coco for some last comments about specific recommendations you have, particularly to the donor community. Maybe one recommendation you have about what's absolutely needed to be funded and typically overlooked from that sector as a whole. If we can use those as a sort of rounding off conclusion to our webinar today. Johanne, can I start with you?
A wide question, looking for a specific answer. I think from what I've been going through, I would say we need a lot more help in organizing cooperatives. We find that we work with cooperatives, but the leaders are the ones doing the work. You have a chairman, you have a secretary, you have a treasurer, their vices, their seconds in command, their deputies. But employing a cooperative manager. It doesn't have to be a senior manager, a youth, someone coming out of college. Here's your internship, help organize administratively, keeping records, managing finance with collateral, managing buyers with meeting quality specifications. This structural help to a cooperative, to a group of smallholder farmers, you're talking about 200, 300 smallholder farmers per cooperative, would go a long way in actually achieving the formalized status, in that you now have a voice in meeting financial partners. We have we have cooperatives that have been able to write grants and actually get warehouses. We have cooperatives now who are now moving into actually getting grower contracts from other partners that we do not even introduce them to, in that now the cooperative is now starting to work by itself. So yeah, assistance to actually organize the smallholder groups so that they can actually go up and face the world as an organized group that is actually knows what it's doing, can meet the needs of the buyers, can meet the needs of the financial partners, and in turn be able to put more money in their members' pockets.
Thank you so much, Johanne. A broad question, but you managed to give a very specific and helpful answer. Direct funding to those cooperative groups for that desperately needed capacity. Grace, can I pass to you next?
Sure, thanks, Malik. And thanks to Coco and Johanne and the rest of the participants for what's been an engaging session. I think before I answer the question, I would just like to reiterate what we've seen today, that by virtue of having the three of us speaking from essentially what is different areas of expertise, different backgrounds, it's very clear that there needs to be an ecosystem of support where addressing one issue won't necessarily fix the wheel because it will stop again because of the other. So maybe through the ACF as a function that can coordinate some of these issues, that's one way to try and build this ecosystem of support, not even just in specific countries, but cross-country support. And just building on that in terms of what would I say is the one area that would require funding, also drawing from what Johanne had just said, I would say information. And information from a markets perspective would alleviate some of the issues that Johanne has raised. So let's say a cooperative, has this cooperative manager that drives the agenda for the cooperative. Give that manager information on pricing, give that manager information on markets, their opportunities change very drastically. Then they know that, okay, we need to actually, invest in our quality. We need to invest in our warehousing. We need to find reliable transport. We need to see how we can access markets beyond borders. That is something that can be unlocked through information. The same with what Coco shared around the lady in Tanzania. All she had was information, and through information, she could find ways to generate income that could drive, her objectives for her business. So again, it comes down to information. Even governments themselves don't seem to have access to a lot of information that the private sector does. So if there can be funding for ongoing information gathering and dissemination, I think that could also unlock a lot of opportunities across the region.
Thank you so much, Grace. Really helpful answer, and a good nod to the African Market Observatory. Heike has put a link in the chat to that, so please have a look at that if you're interested in that kind of information. Coco, maybe last word to you, and I will start to close off.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much to everybody who's here today. I think we're starting to build this ecosystem because I think it's these conversations that really helps us to see, to help us become much more impactful. So I will go back to information again, because for us, I think this has been a game changer, and we need more of it. So in terms of donor partners who are out there, I think this kind of platform to help us really give opportunity to small players like big businesses have. They have market intelligence galore, and small business don't have that. So let's start with that. Market intelligence that enables small businesses to also make decision, make strategy, and also get things done. I also say the second thing is, you know, a lot of donor partners are really okay with giving funding for capacity building, but they don't want to go further. Technical assistance is key. So is even some amount of accelerator funding that allows us, the small business person, even somebody like Sai, to be able to get a little bit more support that she herself is not able to do, to get her to see them become more hopeful about the possibility of staying in business. You know, we need to keep small businesses in business. And I think we need to keep them hopeful all the time by some hand-holding and really, throwing, lifelines to them to be able to do the hard work that they do, because that is what is going to create the job opportunities that we're looking for on the continent. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Coco. Well, yeah, as Coco mentioned, thank you all so much for attending. Thank you very much for the rich chat that you guys have put into our Q&A. This is, as I mentioned, been just the first of a series of 3 webinars. The next one will be focusing on African policymakers and competition authorities, specifically addressing how mergers have led to increased concentration and how the legal powers and capacity of competition authorities have and can evolve for more effective competition regimes, and in so doing, contribute to greater food security on the continent. The webinar after that will address the reform agenda for international and regional competition enforcement to tackle increased global concentration and the interaction of markets. The focus for this one will be on a wider international audience of academics, practitioners, and policymakers. So a nod to that earlier comment that was made by Nodia in this webinar. With that, I think I'll close it there. Thank you again to our speakers, Grace, Coco, and Johanne. It was great listening to your insights and recommendations. To our technical team, thank you very much again. And to all the audience, I hope you're able to join us in the subsequent webinars. Please stay alert of the ACF's communications. We will communicate those dates and registration links through our communication channels. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks very much. Okay. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.